Chapter 6, which is about the adventure with the eagle and the finding of the observatory. It was late evening. The age-old mountains towered into the sky, their dreaming heads lost in mist, and mist swirled in cold gray-white swaths in the chasms and valleys between. A sudden rift in the swirling vapor revealed once again the threatening sign of the comet, cut by some unknown hand in a sheer wall of rock. Just below one of the peaks could be seen a solitary pinprick of light, and a closer look would have revealed that it was a little yellow silk tent lit up from inside. From the tent came the sound of the Snufkin's mouth organ, but in this desolate place it was a strange sound indeed. So strange that a hyena some way off lifted up her nose and howled in the most melancholy fashion. One member, at least, of the party in the tent was startled out of his wits. "What was that?" gasped Sniff. "Oh, nothing for you to worry about," Snufkin reassured him. "Listen, what about a story? Did I ever tell you about those snorks I met a few months ago?" "No," said Moomin Ch6 eagerly. "Whatever are snorks?" "Don't you really know what a snork is?" said Snufkin in amazement. "They must be the same family as you, I should think, because they look the same, except that they aren't often white. They can be any color in the world, like an Easter egg, and they change color when they get upset." Moomin Ch6 looked quite angry. "Well," he said, "I've never heard of that branch of the family. A real Moomin Ch6 is always white. Changing color indeed. What an idea." "Well, these snorks were very much like you anyway," said Snufkin calmly. "One was pale green and the other was mauve. I met them the time I escaped from prison, but perhaps you don't want to hear that story." "Oh, yes, we really do," piped Sniff, but Moomin Ch6 only grunted. "Well, it was like this," began Snufkin. "I had picked a melon for dinner. There was a whole field of them, you see, and I thought that one, more or less, wouldn't make any difference. But the moment I dug my teeth into it, a nasty, ugly old man came out of a house nearby and started to shout at me. I listened for a bit, and then I began to wonder if hearing so many bad words was doing me any good. So I started rolling the melon, which was very big and heavy, along the path in front of me, whistling so that I shouldn't hear what the old man was saying. Then he shouted that the police would come after me, so I made a scornful noise to show that I wasn't afraid of the police at all." "How could you dare?" whispered Sniff in deep admiration. "I really can't think," said Snufkin. "But now you must listen. That ugly old man was the police, and after dashing into his house to get into his uniform, he began to follow me. I ran and ran, and the melon rolled and rolled, until in the end we were going so fast that I didn't know which was the melon and which was me." "And that was how you landed in prison, I suppose," said Moomin Ch6. "I suppose it was there you met those creatures. Snorks, didn't you call them?" "Don't interrupt," said Snufkin. "I was just going to tell you how cold and horrible it was in my cell, what with the spiders and rats. I met the snorks outside, after I had escaped one moonless night." "Did you climb out of the window with a rope made from your sheets?" asked Sniff. "No, I dug myself out with a can opener," said Snufkin. "Twice I came up too soon, once just behind the guard, and another time just inside the prison walls. But I went down and started digging again, and the third time I came up in a field. It was turnips and not melons this time, I'm sorry to say. The snork and his sister were fishing for minnows with their tails in a nearby stream." "I should never think of fishing with my tail," said Moomin Ch6. "One should have respect for one's tail. What did you do then?" "Oh, well, we celebrated my escape with minnows and cowslip wine for many hours," answered Snufkin. "And how beautiful the pale green snork maiden was. She had sparkling blue eyes and was covered with beautiful soft fluff. She could weave mats of grass and brew soothing herb drinks if you had a tummy ache. She always wore a flower behind her ear, and round her ankle she had a little gold ring. Pah, women, scoffed Moomin Troll. That was a rotten story. Didn't anything exciting happen? Wasn't my escape from prison exciting enough? Said Snufkin, and went on playing his mouth organ. Moomin Troll sniffed once more, and then crept into his sleeping bag and turned his nose to the wall. But that night he dreamt about a little Snork maiden who looked like him, and he had given her a rose to put behind her ear. In the morning he sat up, muttering, "How silly," to himself. The others had already begun to take down the tent, and Snufkin declared that they would reach the highest peak that day. "But how do you know the observatory is on that peak especially?" asked Sniff, craning his neck to see the top, but without success, as it was hidden in the clouds. "Well," answered Snufkin, "you only have to look at the ground just here. It's covered with cigarette ends, which have obviously been thrown out of the windows by those absent-minded scientists up there." "Oh, I see," said Sniff, looking a bit crestfallen, and wishing he'd noticed the cigarette ends himself. They began to trudge up a little twisting path, tied to each other by a rope to be on the safe side. "Don't forget I warned you," snouted Sniff, who was last. "Don't blame me if something dreadful happens to us." Higher and higher, steeper and steeper. "Phew," said Moomin Troll, mopping his brow. "Mama said it was cold here. Thank goodness the crocodiles ate up those woolly trousers." They stopped and looked down into the valley, feeling very small and lonely amongst the vast empty hills. The only living thing to be seen was an eagle circling far above them on outspread wings. "What an enormous bird!" exclaimed Sniff. "I feel quite sorry for him, all alone in this place." "I expect there's a Mrs. Eagle somewhere, and probably some baby eaglets too," said Snufkin. The bird was hovering over them, turning his head with the cold eyes and strong curved beak from side to side, when suddenly he poised himself on trembling, outstretched wings. "I wonder what he's up to now," said Sniff. "I don't like the look of him," Moomin Troll said anxiously. "Perhaps," began Snufkin, but he got no further, except to scream frantically, "Look out! He's diving!" They all threw themselves against the rocks, looking wildly for somewhere to hide. In a rush of wings, the eagle swooped towards them, while they squeezed themselves into a crevice in the rock and held each other tight in terrified helplessness. He was on top of them! It was like a whirlwind. One moment they were surrounded by the great wings that beat wildly against the rock, and the next there was complete quiet. Trembling in every limb, they peered out of their hiding place to see the eagle sailing in a great semicircle below them. After a moment, he rose and disappeared amongst the mountain tops. "He's ashamed that he missed us," said Snufkin. "Eagles are very proud. He won't try again." Sniff was counting on his fingers. The crocodiles, the giant lizard, the waterfall, the underground tunnel, the eagle. 5 awful experiences. It's beginning to get monotonous. "We've still got the biggest adventure to come," said Moomin Troll. "The comet." They all looked up at the heavy gray clouds. "I wish we could see the sky," he went on rather nervously. "Come on, let's start." By the afternoon they had climbed so high that they had reached the clouds, and the going was slippery and dangerous. Damp veils of mist swirled around them. They were dreadfully cold. Moomin Troll thought longingly of his woolly trousers, and surrounded completely by an awful floating emptiness. "I always thought clouds were soft and woolly and nice to be in," said Sniff, sneezing. "Ugh, I'm beginning to be sorry I ever came on this expedition." Suddenly, Moomin Troll stood still. "Wait," he said, "there's something shining. A light, or is it a diamond?" "A diamond!" screamed Sniff, who loved jewels. Moomin Troll set off, dragging the others after him by the rope. "It's a little gold bracelet," he announced at last. "Be careful," shouted Snufkin. "It's right on the edge of the precipice." But Moomin Troll wasn't listening. He crept slowly towards the edge and stretched down for the bracelet. Snufkin and Sniff held the rope tight, and Moomin Troll crept a little farther down until at last he reached the gold ring. "Do you think it could be the Snork Maiden's?" he asked. "Yes, that's hers," said Snufkin, sighing. "It looks as if she has fallen over the edge. So young and beautiful, too." Moomin Troll was too overcome to speak, and they went sadly on their way. The mists were beginning to thin out, and it was warmer. They stopped on a ledge to rest and stared in silence at the swirling gray vapor on all sides of them. Suddenly it divided and rolled away until at last the three tired travelers could see where they were, and what they saw took their breath away. There was a sea of clouds at their feet, which looked so soft and beautiful that they wanted to wade out and dive and dance in it. "Now we're above the clouds," said Snufkin solemnly, and they turned round to look up at the sky that had been hidden for so long. "Look," whispered Sniff in terror. The sky was no longer blue. It was a pale red. "Perhaps it's the sunset," said Snufkin doubtfully. But Moomin Troll looked very grave and said, "No, this time it's the comet. It's on its way to the Earth." On the very top of the jagged peak above them stood the observatory. Inside, scientists made thousands of remarkable observations, smoked thousands of cigarettes, and lived alone with the stars. They made their way up to it in silence, and Moomin Troll opened the door. There was a staircase inside, and up they went to find themselves on the threshold of a high room with a glass roof. In the middle of the floor was a giant telescope, which revolved slowly, keeping watch on the sky, and there was the constant whirring sound of a machine. Two professors bustled here and there, tightening screws, pushing knobs, and making notes. Moomin Troll gave a respectful cough. "Good afternoon," he said, but the scientist took no notice. "Fine weather," said Moomin Troll a little louder, but there was still no answer. Then he went forward and touched one of the professors timidly on the arm. "We've come several 100 miles in order to meet you, sir," he said. "What? You again?" exclaimed the professor. "Excuse me," said Moomin Troll, "but I've never been here before." "Then it was a couple extraordinarily like you," muttered the professor. "Crowds of people coming here. We haven't time, you know, simply haven't time. This comet is the most interesting thing in the last 93 years. Now what do you want? Make it quick." "I only wanted to know those people who were here before," stammered Moomin Troll. "I suppose it wasn't a little pale green stork maiden, all fluffy, perhaps with a flower behind her ear." Your explanation is most unscientific," said the professor impatiently. "I know nothing about it, except that there was a tiresome female here disturbing me about some trinket she had lost. Off with you now. You've already wasted 44 seconds of my time." Moomin Troll backed out nervously. "Well," said Sniff, "is it coming?" "When will it fall?" asked Snufkin. "Oh, I quite forgot to ask," mumbled Moomin Troll, blushing. "But that little Snork Maiden has been here. She's alive. She didn't fall down the precipice." "Well, I must say," Snufkin burst out. "I can't make you out," said Sniff. "I thought you didn't like girls. Now I'll go and ask." And he trotted up to the other professor. "Please, may I have a look through your telescope?" he asked politely. "I am very interested in comets, and I've heard so much about your wonderful discoveries here." The professor was very flattered and put his spectacles up on his forehead. "Have you now?" he said. "Then you must come and have a look, my little friend." He arranged the telescope for Sniff and told him to go ahead. Sniff was rather frightened at first. Outer space was quite black, and the big stars flickered as if they were alive, and far in the distance shone something red like a wicked eye. "Is that the comet?" he whispered. "Yes," said the professor. "But it's not moving at all," said Sniff in a puzzled voice. "And I don't see any tail either." "Its tail is behind," explained the professor. "It is rushing straight toward the Earth. That's why it doesn't look as if it's moving. But you can see that it gets bigger every day." When will it arrive? Asked Sniff, staring in fascinated curiosity at the little red spark through the telescope. According to my reckoning, it should hit the Earth on the 7th of October at 8:42 p.m., possibly 4 seconds later, said the professor. And what will happen then? Asked Sniff. What will happen? Said the professor in surprise. Well, I hadn't thought about that, but I shall record the events in great detail, you may be sure. Can you tell me what the date is today, sir? Sniff asked. It is the 2nd of October, answered the professor, and the time is exactly 6:28. Then I think we must go, said Sniff. Thank you very much indeed for your help. He returned to the others with an important look on his face. I had a very interesting conversation with the professor, he said, and we have come to the conclusion that the comet will fall on the 7th of October at 8:42 p.m., possibly 4 seconds later. Then we must hurry home as fast as we can, said Moomin Ch6 anxiously. If only we can get home to Mama before it comes, nothing can happen. She will know what to do. They left the observatory and set off on the long journey home. It was getting dark, and the awful red light in the sky was stronger. The clouds had gone, and far down in the valley below they could just make out the narrow ribbon of river and patches of forest. I'm longing to get away from this stony country, said Snufkin. Even a poet can have enough sometimes. I wonder where the storks spent the night, said Moomin Ch6. I must give that wretched girl her ankle ring back. And he hurried on at such a speed that the others could hardly keep up with him.